Lewis Hamilton makes a shock move to Red Bull, cutting ties with Ferrari immediately. Stay until the end to uncover all the reasons behind this stunning F1 twist. Only a few hours had passed since the conclusion of the Austrian Grand Prix when an invisible shift began to reshape the future of one of Formula One's most iconic figures. Lewis Hamilton, the seven-time world champion whose presence alone commands headlines and respect, had just completed yet another race that drained not only his energy but, more significantly, his patience. The grandstands emptied, the podium ceremony wrapped up, and the television broadcasts moved on to the usual highlights and statistics. But while the world looked ahead to the next round, Hamilton was already emotionally detached from the car he had just driven and from the team that had promised him a revival. What had started as a season of optimism had steadily turned into a sequence of frustration, and Austria was the race that pushed him to a silent internal breaking point. The early moments of the weekend were filled with the kind of hopeful anticipation that often accompanies technical upgrades. Ferrari had arrived in Spielberg with a small but targeted update, new floor edges, modified suspension settings, and a rear wing tweak intended to improve drag efficiency. Hamilton, speaking to the media before FP1, appeared measured but hopeful, explaining how the team had been working tirelessly behind the scenes and that even small steps could pave the way to progress. He complimented the engineers, spoke glowingly of the atmosphere in Maranello, and gave the impression of a man still fully invested in the long-term plan. But beneath the calm exterior, there was already disquiet. The simulator work leading up to Austria had produced confusing data. The numbers didn't match what was expected. There were inconsistencies in airflow predictions, thermal degradation patterns on the tires that didn't correlate with real-world observations, and a persistent problem with rear instability under braking. And when Hamilton climbed into the car for FP1, it didn't take long for those same doubts to resurface. The updates didn't deliver the promised gains. The car felt nervous on throttle application, sluggish through high-speed corners, and unpredictable over the curbs. It was as if the tweaks had only magnified the platform's limitations rather than addressed them. Despite those issues, Hamilton stayed composed. In debriefs, he was clinical, detailed, constructive. He broke down each sector, offered precise feedback on ride height adjustments, aerobalance, and differential settings. He avoided emotional language. But those who knew him best, his personal trainer, his longtime physio, his performance coach, could see something different in his demeanor. He wasn't just frustrated with the machinery. He was running out of reasons to keep believing that a breakthrough was coming. Qualifying added to the weight. He pushed the SF24 to its absolute limits, but could only secure a mid-grid slot. The car lacked the stability to attack the corners with confidence. He couldn't lean on the front end. The rear would step out when he tried to carry speed into the apex. Ferrari's telemetry told one story, but Hamilton's instinct told another. The team encouraged him to trust the data, to believe that the race would come to them. But trust, he knew, wasn't infinite. On race day, Hamilton delivered one of his grittiest performances of the season, managing tire wear with clinical precision, executing clean overtakes, and even compensating for a car that continued to underperform relative to the competition. He extended his stints, adapted to fuel load shifts, and adjusted his brake bias mid-race to compensate for unpredictable balance changes. But none of it mattered. He was trapped in a no-man's land, not fast enough to fight the leaders, too compromised to fend off charging midfielders. And once again, a questionable pit strategy cost him precious track position. When he crossed the line, the silence on the radio was deafening. After pulling into park firm, Hamilton didn't linger. He removed his helmet without looking toward the pit wall. He walked past the mechanics with barely a nod. The cameras caught him walking alone, head slightly lowered, jaw clenched. He gave his mandatory interview, speaking in clipped phrases. "We've got to dig deeper," he said. "I did everything I could. The performance just isn't there." But what the world didn't hear, what only a few trusted confidants knew, was that his mind had already moved on. He wasn't thinking about Hungary or Spa. He wasn't wondering what updates would come next. He was done waiting. In private, Hamilton had reached the conclusion that Ferrari's structure was fundamentally flawed. Not because of lack of effort, but because of too many voices pulling in different directions. Decisions were slow. Accountability was diffused. Some engineers were focused on simulation correlations, others on mechanical grip, but no one seemed to be steering the ship with unified vision. He had expressed these concerns repeatedly, both in team meetings and in one-on-one sessions with key personnel. But every time, he was reassured that a corner was just around the bend. That the data was encouraging. That the next upgrade cycle would fix it. It hadn't. And now, Hamilton was ready to move. Long before the Austrian Grand Prix, informal conversations had been happening behind closed doors. Nothing binding. Nothing overt. But lines of communication had been opened. Representatives of Hamilton's management team had quietly maintained dialogue with multiple teams, including organizations not currently considered frontrunners but who had clear 5-year plans, ambitious technical departments, and a hunger for leadership. In the aftermath of the race in Austria, those conversations gained urgency. Some within Mercedes were aware. Despite their past, Hamilton had remained on good terms with several key figures at Brackley. There were occasional calls, friendly texts, even informal dinners during off weekends. A few within Aston Martin had sensed it too. Fernando Alonso, always perceptive, had mentioned cryptically to his race engineer, "He won't stay if they keep wasting him like this." What no one expected, however, was Hamilton entering the Ferrari motorhome, walking past the usual hospitality areas and heading straight for a private meeting room. Cameras tried to follow but were turned away. Inside, he sat alone with Frédéric Vasseur for nearly 40 minutes. No advisors. No press officers. Just two men who had known each other for over a decade, talking behind closed doors. When Hamilton left, his expression hadn't changed, but something had been resolved. In the following days, rumors spread rapidly. Was this the end of his Ferrari experiment? Would he honor the full term of his contract? Was he preparing to shift into a new role, part driver, part constructor, perhaps even something more radical? The answers were unclear. But the certainty was this: Austria had not just been another race. It had been a moment of profound internal change. A chapter had closed, even if no announcement had been made. Hamilton was no longer waiting for Ferrari to catch up. He was already thinking beyond them. And whether it meant starting fresh with another team, leading a bold new project, or redefining what a Formula One legacy could be, one thing was evident. He would decide what came next, not the team, not the paddock, and not even history. The tension that had slowly simmered within Ferrari over the course of the season had now become a suffocating force, felt in every corridor of the team's paddock setup. No one needed to say it aloud. Hamilton's frustration had been steadily growing, visible in his body language, audible in his radio calls, and impossible to hide during post-session meetings. The romantic notion of bringing Ferrari back to glory, of writing the final triumphant chapter of his career in red, had been slowly unraveling under the weight of missed opportunities and an operational structure that couldn't keep pace with the sport's most agile competitors. The dream was there, yes, but the execution was failing him. He had watched with increasing discomfort as rival outfits like McLaren and Red Bull rolled out bold aerodynamic packages and mechanical upgrades race after race. Their innovations weren't cautious, they were ambitious, calculated gambles that brought immediate performance gains. Ferrari, meanwhile, continued to approach development with a kind of institutional hesitance, afraid to disrupt stability even when it meant sacrificing progress. Promised upgrades were delayed, changes were minimal, and internal debates dragged on long after the window to act had closed. And when it came to race day decision-making, the cracks were even more evident. In briefings, Hamilton had voiced concerns about pit stop calls being too reactive rather than proactive. He'd raised alarms about timing miscalculations, about being left out too long on aging tires, about ignoring undercut threats, about calls to push at the exact moments where tire conservation was paramount. Week after week, the same mistakes repeated themselves under slightly different circumstances, and every time it happened, he bit his tongue just a little less. Austria was the moment it all finally boiled over. During the race, the calls from the Ferrari pit wall were hesitant, disjointed. They instructed him to increase his pace just as he began feeling tire drop-off. They hesitated on his second stop, leaving him out 2 laps beyond the ideal window, dropping him into unfavorable traffic and killing any hope of a clean undercut. To make matters worse, the engineers failed to escalate warnings about his mounting track limits breaches. He knew he'd exceeded them once, maybe twice, but without a clear, unequivocal final warning, he pushed on. The result, a 10-second post-race penalty that dropped him from a strong finish to a forgettable one. Inside the debrief, Hamilton didn't lash out. He didn't need to. The silence in the room said it all. He sat still, helmet still on, hands gripping the sides of his chair, jaw tight. When he finally stood up and left without a word, it wasn't a tantrum. It was a statement. One that everyone present understood without explanation. That night, under a thick veil of secrecy, a private aircraft departed from Salzburg. There was no fanfare. No team officials waving goodbye. No photographers. No hints at what was unfolding behind the scenes. But inside that jet were two figures who not long ago wouldn't have been caught in the same room, let alone sharing a quiet conversation at 30,000 feet. Lewis Hamilton sat across from Christian Horner, Red Bull's long-standing team principal and the man who once orchestrated Sebastian Vettel's dominance, then Max Verstappen's era-defining rise. The fact that Hamilton, arguably the greatest driver of the modern era, was now entertaining talks with Red Bull would have seemed absurd a year ago. Now, it was simply inevitable. The initial approach had been tentative. Subtle feelers had been sent after Monaco. After the disappointment at Barcelona, another coded message. But Austria changed everything. This time, Horner didn't play coy. His message, sent through encrypted channels, was brief and definitive. If the door's still open, we walk through it tonight. Hamilton's reply was even shorter. Make it happen. On board the jet, there was no need for preamble. Horner laid it all out, unfiltered and precise. You know what we've built. This isn't about just adding another title to the cabinet. It's about closing the chapter your way. With the best car. With the best infrastructure. With the best people around you. Hamilton didn't answer immediately. He watched the night sky outside his window, the reflections of city lights shimmering below like distant opportunities. Finally, he turned back. I believed in the Ferrari project. I still do, in theory. But belief without results doesn't win championships. I've spent the last seasons adapting, compromising, waiting. But I don't have time to wait anymore. I've got fire in me, and I'm not wasting it hoping for a system to fix itself from the inside. Horner didn't flinch. He knew this wasn't just about the car or the numbers. It was about legacy. About control. About being able to shape the final chapters of a career on Hamilton's own terms. We don't need to build you into the team. We just need to unleash you. The car's ready. The tools are there. You don't need to lift anything alone. We already have a machine that works. You just need to drive. Hamilton leaned forward, his voice low but resolute. I don't need a PR move. I don't need a ceremonial seat. I want to race. I want to win. And I want to do it in a place that doesn't wait until after the checkered flag to figure out what went wrong. Horner nodded. Then let's take that fight straight to them. The conversation stretched late into the night, as they discussed the technical program, the dynamics with Verstappen, the power unit roadmap for 2026, and the internal politics of making such a move palatable within Red Bull's hierarchy. But by the time they landed near Milton Keynes, the tone had changed completely. What started as a conversation had evolved into a plan. No official announcements were made. No contracts were signed. Not yet. But the direction was clear, and both men knew it. A seismic shift was beginning, quietly, strategically, but with the power to completely upend the Formula One landscape. The whispers that would eventually leak to the media would sound like madness at first. But they would all trace back to this moment, this flight, this decision. Hamilton didn't just want to win again. He wanted to prove once and for all that greatness isn't about being loyal to the wrong cause. It's about knowing when to walk away from what no longer serves you and take control of your destiny. And now, he was ready. Following a flight shrouded in secrecy, meticulously planned down to the last detail to avoid detection, the aircraft touched down in the pre-dawn darkness at a private airstrip nestled just outside Milton Keynes. There were no lights from paparazzi cameras, no swirling noise of media vans, no curious eyes lurking near the fences, just the sharp morning air and a runway bathed in soft orange hues. The descent itself had been arranged under a different name, the flight plan classified internally, the cabin crew briefed to treat their passengers with absolute discretion. This wasn't just any meeting, it was the kind of encounter that could alter the course of Formula One's modern history. The car awaiting them was jet black, with windows tinted to near opacity, engine already humming softly. There were no greetings, no chatter, just silent coordination. Lewis Hamilton emerged from the aircraft dressed simply but with unmistakable presence, his cap pulled low, eyes hidden behind sunglasses despite the lack of sun. Christian Horner, who had flown with him under the radar, walked beside him with the familiarity of someone who'd been working on this rendezvous for months behind closed doors. No handlers, no assistants, no documentation. Every part of this was carefully orchestrated for maximum confidentiality. The vehicle sped through a nondescript service road, bypassing any possible surveillance routes. It stopped not at Red Bull Racing's main reception, but at a restricted underground entrance typically reserved for senior engineers and classified deliveries. A steel door slid open automatically, revealing a private elevator that ascended directly to the executive-level corridors. Security cameras were switched off for this brief window. This visit wasn't to exist on any official logs. Inside, the headquarters was still, the lighting dimmed to maintenance mode. Only a select inner circle had been notified, a small cluster of department heads and trusted engineers, each handpicked by Horner. The building, usually alive with activity, now resembled a sanctuary. Hamilton followed Horner through hallways lined with trophies, carbon fiber mock-ups, and design schematics. But what caught his eye, unmistakably, was the RB16B, the 2021 title-winning machine, mounted in perfect lighting near the entrance of the design wing. It stood as a monument to one of the sport's most contested championships. Its presence was deliberate. Horner glanced at Hamilton, then motioned to the car with the subtlest of nods. "That one changed everything," he said quietly. "Imagine what we could do together next." No further words were needed. They moved deeper into the building, where the technical teams had gathered in a soundproof operations room. Screens flickered with telemetry, CFD models, and data overlays. On the main monitor was a prototype chassis marked confidential, codenamed RBX1, accompanied by race simulations from future Grand Prix tracks. The engineers didn't ask questions. They knew who he was. Some watched in awe, others with subtle disbelief that the man who had defined an era at Mercedes and recently stepped into Ferrari colors was now sitting before them, inspecting their next weapon. The lead aerodynamicist presented a data packet, projections showing reduced drag coefficients, improved lateral stability through complex corner sequences, and enhanced tire degradation models compared to their current platform. The vehicle's simulated behavior in turbulent air was demonstrably better than any rival car in the field. Another engineer walked through early suspension concepts, including a new front geometry that preserved downforce without compromising turn-in response. There were side-by-side comparisons to the RB20, Mercedes W15, and Ferrari's latest updates, every number designed to answer the question, could this car make Lewis Hamilton a champion again? Hamilton leaned in closer. His gaze darted between heat maps, torque curve simulations, and live development notes. He wasn't just absorbing the information, he was interrogating it with the mind of someone who'd lived through every type of chassis philosophy. He questioned the engine cooling layout, asked about the turbo lag response under different fuel loads, and wanted specifics on how the hybrid deployment strategy would evolve under the 2026 regulation shift. Then came the tour of the assembly floor, lit only partially as it operated in skeleton mode. A few night shift mechanics were conducting routine checks and adjustments, completely unaware that their next potential lead driver was approaching until the moment they saw him. For a brief instant, time seemed to halt. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. Tools stopped turning. The sight of Lewis Hamilton, accompanied by Christian Horner, walking casually past the carbon composite stations, sent a jolt of electricity through the room. Christian broke the stunned silence with a chuckle and a nod. "This is Lewis. You'll probably be seeing more of him soon." No cameras clicked. No one dared speak out of turn. Just respectful silence, disbelief, and a sense of history already beginning to unfold. In the adjoining chamber, Hamilton was given a glimpse into Red Bull powertrains, the heart of their upcoming independence. There, engineers explained the aggressive roadmap for their next-generation MGUK system, aiming for efficiency without sacrificing output. Lewis asked about cooling envelope constraints, about how power delivery would be mapped across a longer race window, and how their in-house simulations were compensating for the lack of a legacy supplier. Every response was clear, sharp, and confident. The message was unspoken but loud. Red Bull didn't need Mercedes anymore. They didn't need Honda. They needed a leader. The final portion of the tour brought them to a quiet executive suite overlooking the simulator floor. No contracts were presented. No champagne bottles popped. Instead, Horner and Hamilton sat across from one another in two simple chairs. No assistants, no legal counsel, no PR teams. Just racer and boss. Strategist and icon. The air between them wasn't just thick with potential, it was filled with mutual calculation. Lewis finally broke the silence. "You've built something serious here. Everything's lean. Efficient. No waste. It reminds me of Brackley at its peak, before the bureaucracy." Horner's reply was slow, deliberate. "That's the idea. We don't carry the past here. We sharpen what's next. And if you want another shot at making history, this is where it happens." Hamilton didn't nod. He didn't smile. But something in his eyes shifted, an internal click, a recalibration. The gears in his head were already turning. He wasn't here for nostalgia. He was here to see if the fire could be reignited. And in that sterile high-tech building, surrounded by the tools and minds behind the current kings of F1, something had indeed started to burn again. No announcements would be made that day. No leaks would hit the media. But everyone in that facility, from the aerodynamicist in the corner to the mechanic gripping a torque wrench with trembling hands, knew what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't a visit. It was a warning. Red Bull was planning something bigger than domination. They were planning a dynasty. And Lewis Hamilton might just be the final piece. As darkness settled over the English countryside, the atmosphere inside Red Bull's hidden executive compound remained charged with an almost electric tension. Nestled far from the prying eyes of the media and the endless buzz of the paddock, an elite gathering was already underway, one that would alter the DNA of Formula One's future. The air inside the climate-controlled meeting space was crisp, nearly too sterile, as if the very walls were absorbing the enormity of what was about to be decided. Lewis Hamilton walked into the sleek conference chamber with the same composure he brings to a pole position lap. Calculated, calm, completely in control. Dressed in tailored black, he said nothing as he entered, simply giving a single nod to the four men already seated. At one end of the table was Christian Horner, posture straight, expression unreadable. Beside him sat Helmut Marko, whose cold gaze rarely missed a detail. Across from them, Red Bull's senior legal advisor and the head of contractual affairs waited silently. In the center of the polished carbon fiber tabletop lay a discreet black folder, embossed only with the project codename, Operation Typhoon. It had been months in the making. Conversations behind closed doors, encrypted calls across continents, non-disclosure agreements signed by intermediaries. What had started as a speculative idea, a whispered what if, following a series of internal shifts within Red Bull and mounting frustrations inside Ferrari, had now crystallized into this moment. The binder in front of Hamilton wasn't just a contract. It was a declaration of intent. A blueprint for war. Inside the folder were 52 pages of carefully crafted terms, tailored with surgical accuracy to meet not just Hamilton's professional expectations, but his personal values, competitive edge, and long-term vision. The financial package was immense, but it wasn't the headline. He had earned more elsewhere. What stood out were the structural guarantees, complete access to the team's cutting-edge simulator facilities, real-time influence on engineering strategy meetings, and most controversially, authority to veto any future teammate beyond year one. No other driver had been offered that kind of influence, not even Vettel in his peak years. Hamilton would effectively become more than a driver. He would be an architect of the team's evolution. There were layers of bonus structures built into the contract, championship-triggered escalators, media partnership incentives, and global brand alignment opportunities. A portion of Red Bull's marketing empire would now align directly with the Hamilton brand, creating a commercial juggernaut that extended far beyond the track. Special edition product lines, co-branded fashion ventures, and global sustainability campaigns were all mapped out in the appendices. He turned the pages with deliberate slowness, studying the language, pausing now and then at key clauses. The room remained silent. Horner didn't push. Marko didn't fidget. They knew Hamilton didn't need persuasion. He needed precision. When he reached the final page, he didn't hesitate. From his inner jacket pocket, he pulled out a brushed steel fountain pen, his own. The click of the cap coming off felt louder than it should have. He leaned forward, put ink to paper, and signed with a sharp, fluid motion. No theatrics. Just finality. It was done. There was no applause, no exclamation. Just a moment of mutual awareness that something irreversible had taken place. The balance of power in Formula One had shifted, subtly, quietly, but unmistakably. Hamilton was now a Red Bull driver. Christian Horner broke the silence with a slight smile. Well, that's one for the history books, he said softly, as the binder was closed and locked in a secure briefcase by legal. The mood began to change, the tension slowly giving way to something warmer, more human, relief, maybe even excitement. Let's celebrate, Horner added. Something worthy of the moment. Without missing a beat, a waiting car was called. They departed discreetly for Cliveden House, a regal estate tucked deep into the Berkshire Hills, a place as steeped in secrecy and legacy as the sport itself. Known for hosting dignitaries, royals, and heads of state, the manor had been sealed for a private function. Only a handful of staff remained on site, pre-briefed and NDA-bound. In a velvet-lined dining room lit by candlelight and a roaring fireplace, a bespoke tasting menu had been curated to honor the occasion. Every detail had been meticulously considered, from the selection of vintage cutlery to the sommelier's choice of a rare 1990 Chateau Margaux, decanted for nearly 4 hours. Dinner began with wild mushroom consommé and seared langoustine. That was followed by black truffle risotto, then saddle of venison with dark cherry glaze and celeriac puree. Each dish served not as nourishment but as ceremony, each bite honoring the magnitude of the night. But amid the elegance and decadence, the discussion remained electric. Hamilton didn't waste time with flattery or nostalgia. Instead, he cut to the core. "You realize what this means, right?" he asked, voice even but loaded. "This isn't just about race wins or titles. This is about rewriting the story they all think they know." Horner nodded, holding his glass but not drinking. "We're not here to repeat history," he said. "We're here to redefine it." And they meant it. There was no illusion that the alliance would be easy. They both carried scars from a decade of clashing on opposite sides of Formula One's fiercest rivalries. But now, for the first time, they were united not by convenience, but by vision. Legacy was the word that kept surfacing, spoken, implied, woven through every sentence. Hamilton talked about the younger generation, about reshaping the sports culture, about pushing technological boundaries without compromising on values. Horner spoke of dominance, not just for one season, but for years. About building something so ruthlessly efficient and compelling that it would become untouchable. Somewhere between the venison and dessert, a caramelized apple tart with thyme-infused creme fraiche, Horner leaned back and said, "Do you think they'll see this coming?" Hamilton chuckled, finally letting down a layer of steel. "Not a chance," he said. "They think I'm winding down. But I'm just getting started." Outside, the estate grounds were wrapped in fog, the only sound a distant owl in the trees. As they finished their final glasses of wine, no one in the room was thinking about contracts anymore. They were thinking about Melbourne, about Bahrain, about Monaco, about the silence on the grid when Hamilton steps into a Red Bull for the very first time, about the panic it would send through rivals, the recalibration it would force upon engineers from Woking to Brackley to Maranello. The move wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about legacy anymore. It was about power, pure, unfiltered, calculated power. And in that moment, somewhere between the flicker of candlelight and the closing of a historic deal, Lewis Hamilton took it back. All of it. The heavy wooden doors of the lakeside villa closed with a soft click, sealing in a conversation that, if overheard, would have sent shockwaves across the entire racing world. Hidden behind drawn curtains and surrounded by a security detail that made sure no one even got close enough to guess what was happening inside, two of the most influential figures in modern Formula One were deep into a dinner that was far more than just a meal. It was a strategic summit that could alter the entire trajectory of the sport. Lewis Hamilton sat back in his chair, letting the last remnants of laughter fade as he gave his glass a lazy swirl, the wine catching the flicker of the firelight. There was something in his expression, not smugness, not arrogance, but something cooler, more calculated. A flicker of satisfaction, like a chess master watching a trap snap shut after a 20-move plan. "You do realize," he said, the smile tugging at the corner of his lips, "Toto's going to absolutely unravel when this gets out." Across the table, Christian Horner didn't bother to hide his amusement. His eyes narrowed with a knowing gleam as he leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, the atmosphere between them no longer one of negotiation but of mutual recognition. He'll wear the mask, of course. Say all the right things. Lewis is a legend. We support his choices. He's always part of the Mercedes family. But inside, Horner let out a quiet breath that carried all the weight of history. He'll be seething. Because this isn't just a move. It's a statement. And it comes from you. Hamilton leaned in as well now, The air thick with tension that was no longer uncertain. It was loaded, charged, ready to ignite. He made one final offer. After Monaco. No fanfare. No agents. Just him and me, face to face. He flew in on his own. Said he wanted to talk man to man. 3-year extension. Full freedom. Clauses tailored to me. And if I wanted to return, truly come home, it would be like 2013 all over again. A clean slate. That's what he called it. Horner said nothing, but his fingers twitched slightly, tapping once against the rim of his water glass. He had suspected something like that. He hadn't expected it to come so soon, or be so desperate. But you walked away, he said finally, quietly, though the certainty in his voice was unmistakable. Hamilton nodded slowly. I had to. I couldn't live in the past. Not with what happened in 2021. Not after Abu Dhabi. Not after the silence that followed. You don't just go back to a place that watched you fall and said nothing. You don't build a future by returning to the ashes of what burned you. The words hung in the air, too heavy for a response. Not that one was needed. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about transformation. About control. About rewriting a story that had once been hijacked by circumstances, by politics, by decisions made by those not in the car. Outside the villa, the lake lay still, moonlight shimmering across the surface. But inside, the silence wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. The servers had cleared the final course. The wine had been refilled. Phones remained powered down, untouched. Every detail of this meeting had been meticulously planned, every risk accounted for. Only a handful of people even knew it was happening. Red Bull's executive leadership had been kept in the dark. This was Horner's project, his vision, his gamble. And Hamilton? He hadn't even told his closest confidants the real reason for his trip to Switzerland. His public calendar said he was resting after the last triple header. In truth, he was preparing for war. The PR team back in the UK had already been given pre-written statements to release in the event of a media leak, most of them non-committal, vague, designed to buy time. Ferrari believed he was still evaluating contract options, and that negotiations were progressing normally. Mercedes assumed he was going through a period of reflection, not defection. No one, not even Leclerc, not even Russell, knew that the most seismic move in the sport's modern history had already begun to unfold. The moment they raised their glasses one last time beneath the dim antique chandelier, the deal wasn't theoretical. It was real. Verbal, binding in spirit, and set to become public in mere weeks. Hamilton would don Red Bull colors. Not as a ceremonial ambassador. Not as a fading icon. But as a title contender. As a weapon. As the final evolution of a career built on defying odds and redefining limits. Already, in a vault-like room inside Red Bull's technical headquarters, a small engineering group had begun running simulations with a slightly altered cockpit model. They weren't told why. Just that the seating position needed to change by exactly 2.1 centimeters. Brake mapping was being recalibrated for a new style. Anonymously. Quietly. But with purpose. Hamilton was already shaping the car before the world knew he was even coming. The media circus that would follow once this leaked, or was leaked strategically, would make the Rosberg retirement look tame. Pundits would lose their minds. Some would accuse him of betrayal. Others would hail him as a genius. Fans would split. Tribalism would flare. And in the midst of it all, Hamilton would smile, not because he needed validation, but because he knew something they didn't. This wasn't just about 2024 or 2025. This was about legacy. Not preserving it, redefining it, expanding it, cementing a narrative that had been fractured, questioned, distorted ever since that night in Abu Dhabi. By stepping into Red Bull, he wasn't conceding to the enemy. He was taking their weapon and aiming it in a direction they hadn't anticipated. And Horner? He understood what it meant. He knew the risks. The media pressure. The internal politics. The delicate dance with Max Verstappen, who would need to be handled not just with care, but with extraordinary tact. Because bringing in Hamilton wouldn't just shake the grid. It would shake Max, force him to elevate. Or alienate. And Horner, as always, was willing to play that long game. Back at the villa, the plates had been cleared. The staff dismissed. Hamilton stood slowly, his silhouette framed by the moonlight cascading through the tall windows. He turned to Horner, offering a handshake. Not formal, not performative, but final. "We keep it locked down," he said. "Until I say when." Horner nodded. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And with that, Hamilton stepped out into the night, the crisp alpine air brushing past his jacket, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, under cover of darkness, a decision had been made that would ripple across the entire sport. And when it finally exploded into public view, it wouldn't just be breaking news. It would be the kind of story that outlives careers, restructures dynasties, and sends every team on the grid scrambling to catch up with the man who once again had changed everything without ever touching the throttle.